Hi there, it's Ari from Paradigm Threat. I'm going to do a walking series today on the question, what has happened in the last 10 years? I've seen this question come up a lot, and usually people ask, life was semi-normal up until about 2014, and then this happened, and then that happened, and everything's just been crazy since then. And I agree. I mean, that's basically the timeline that I think that I felt myself. So here I'm at Scottsdale, Camelback, and just waiting for my plane, so I thought I'd just throw my thoughts out on this one and just start with the answer. I think I have kind of a reason why this might have happened then. Have you ever heard of the classic documentary theory of the Bible and the Old Testament? You can look it up on Wiki. This is a theory that's been around for about 100 years or so, maybe less, and it has been the mainstream theory of how the Old Testament should be put together, and the New Testament as well. And it basically says here are a bunch of sources: A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever. I'm not too familiar, honestly. But I was kind of shocked when I was looking through the Wikipedia and I found out that after the rise and fall of Nazism in Germany, denazification didn't really completely affect all of Germany. The elite got to basically keep all their stuff. And all the occult stuff and all that was definitely not denazified. And one of the main claims they had during their short reign was that the Old Testament was put together by a bunch of non-qualified people, essentially people that put religion before fact or objectivity. And that may or may not be true, blah blah blah. But the point is, in the 1970s, a bunch of German scholars went and just published their research on this and said, look, I think it was F or E, source E of the Bible. The reference point for E is the one that they threw a bunch of shade on and said, I don't know about that one. You don't seem to have any reference point, real life sources for it. This is just oral tradition stuff. And then they go on to say an A, B, and C too. I mean, we need to look into those, basically, is how they concluded their efforts in the 70s. And so everyone said, Nazis. And Germans never really had their day. Everyone knows that their media has been suppressed till today. They don't even have weapons in that country, for the most part. Not allowed to own a weapon. So the scholars raised a question that was never answered. And all this time, everyone's going to church and they're saying, well, the Bible is, some people say, is verbatim as it's written. It's fundamentally exactly what it should be. Other people say, the hand of man, got involved at some point and it became flawed and became a lot of poetry and a lot of opinion, especially when it came to race, gender, sexuality. Lots of opinions all of a sudden, making people question since Protestant times whether or not this stuff is all really from God, But more to the point, we've been all basically saying, fine, the scholars have done their research, they can't be wrong. But in 2014, that was about the year when a bunch of Western scholars started publishing books saying the same thing as those German scholars did in the 70s. It was a different perspective with different conclusions, and they're never going to thank Germany for any of their efforts. But it was the same points, that we can't really trust all this stuff, and just because they found more things later, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, doesn't really add to the believability, authenticity of the sources still in question. So, I looked a little deeper into this, and I want to answer a question that's been on my mind since I've watched the Exodus movie, the Ten Commandments. Since the last time I saw that movie, that one scene where the Pharaoh, the older Pharaoh, decides to strike Moses' name from all of the written texts and artifacts in Egypt so that no one will ever know he was there. And maybe that's why they have been explaining the last 200 years why Moses hasn't shown up in any of the Egyptian texts. Because that's kind of weird, right? But I just looked closer at it, and it turns out it's because there's 4 different versions of the Exodus story. And in the first version, lo and behold, Moses is not there. There is no reference to any character at all, like the wizard Moses. He's a wizard, let's be honest. And instead it was just God and Joshua. And Joshua was the main character. And if you look closely at the Exodus story, you'll see that Joshua was always there. He was always leading the rebellion of the Israelites against the pharaohs. He led them across the desert. He survived when God killed 90% of the Israelites because he thought that they had turned against him at one point in Sinai and they didn't trust him anymore. Brutal, but he survived all of that. He led them all the way to Israel, and Moses did not. Moses got stuck at the river or something, and because of my, anger, God has told me, blah, blah, not allowed to go to Israel, and therefore you're not going to find a tomb of Moses in Israel. Well, you're not going to find a tomb of Joshua in Israel either, because I'm not going to get into that now, but Joshua was the planet Venus and the dragon that flew across the sky and ended the Egyptian Empire. And honestly, that version of the story doesn't need a Moses. The first version was probably the best version, the one that God basically speaks directly to the reader and says, here's what I've done to Earth, because it's basically people imagining what these planets have to have been thinking during these cataclysmic times, having to imagine them as logical at least, right? So 2014 was basically the sunsetting of the Bible as we know it. And so many people have said since then that we need to start over with that Bible, just put it together in the correct fashion and get to the bottom of some of these stories, because they should belong to everyone in the world, not just, we're kind of past that point, right? So, especially with recent events in Israel, everyone should be past that point about prophecy and chosen people, because it turns out that you can see those stories in glorious fashion, but you can also see them as just for one single group of people in the earth at a time, and that's just so devastating a perspective. It's so awful that we have to be past it now. We have to look at the Bible in just different terms. It wasn't meant for a select chosen people, and there are different gods in the Bible, and there's all kinds of stuff in there. We don't have to follow the first commandment because, even in that commandment, God admits that He's aware that there are other gods and doesn't want you to worship them in front of Him, even though Zeus, Jupiter, and Mars, Hercules, Lancelot, etc., had so much more story to tell and so much more mythology, and they're so much more inspiring than the old Saturn, Kronos, gobbling your children, obey me or die or go to hell, Old Testament gods. So yes, that's part of it. The faith has to change a little bit, but not much. There's a lot of stuff in there that was good, right? There's the Old Testament and there's the New Testament. Some good things about the Old Testament, it's like it's epic and it's glorious, and it's it has a lot of stuff in there that we cannot relate to modern times. So we got to understand them in the context of times they're in. And the New Testament, which is totally different, it has this other message. And we just need to accept that message has everything to do with the sun showing up later. And the sun basically settled the gods' stuff, settled all mythology, blew it all away, and just now it's sort of up to us to put the pieces together, and we can't just let these certain groups of people. I'm finding so much crap in the Bible lately, just stuff that I just didn't expect to find, like Titus 1. He says just directly, that this new Christianity, he's the apostle, right, of Christ, and he's saying this new religion that we created has people among them that have nothing to do with religion. In name only they are, and he called them the circumcision group. Of all the frickin' things to call them, these are the people who circumcise their children. Those people, Titus said, we need to watch out, because they're going to take over this religion. They're going to usurp us, and they're going to add all their bad lessons that never should be taught, he even says, into our modern day lives, and that's why we have all this war and this, usury, of course, is back, and most slavery in any time of all history. You can look it up. This the time of history where the most slaves in irons, in chains, ownership slaves, the real thing. I don't even think such a thing existed in the Egyptian Empire. It's never existed before until now. So, Catalyst 2014. The Western world realizes that it's about to lose all of its foundation mythology, so to speak. And with that comes this just itchy, scary, deep state urge to do something about it before the good guys, take advantage. And who are the good guys? Well, as you've heard me say, Fomenko, posited a whole solution to the Bible a long time ago in the 90s. And he was ignored by the Russian Marxist run government. They're very biased towards him, and that was the USSR, and it wasn't fallen yet. When it did fall, there was no one to say let's champion Fomenko, because they weren't challenging the West anymore. So he went into media, publishing his own books. He published a whole whole volumes of all of these details about how the Bible should be put together, and all of the other books too. The Mayan book and the Book of Mormon. You name it. Can't name them all right now. And we need to look at that solution again. And if he's wrong, then we need to go to the next solution and keep looking, because this is official, not conspiracy theory. Officially, since 2014, the Western world of Christianity, Catholics, and Protestants have no idea, no agreement, I should say, on how the Bible should be put together. And the Muslims have their Quran, and even though it has its problems, and the authors of it are highly suspect, they have this foundational ideology, which is rooted in ancient mythology from the East, and it's not as fragile as our Western mythology was, which was a joke. All this Protestant stuff about, fairy tales of Christ, making him into a superhero, part of the apocalypse for some reason. And of course, he has to be son of God, because if you don't believe he's son of God, then you're out of Christianity. It's like, where'd that come from? Well, explain real fast. Jesus. Zeus just means the old savior, and the savior was the sun, and before that, Mars, before that, Venus, before that, Jupiter, Zeus. At that time, it was actually Zeus. It was constantly renamed throughout the mythologies, throughout history. To Christianity, it was renamed again. And one of the things that Christianity did was it published all of the gods in equal form. Like, there they are. They formed this earth how it is, and now they're gone, and we still need to respect them. So days of the week, right? That's what comes from, so many of our traditions actually come from the East that we've just gobbled up in our attempts to be protesting them with our Protestantism, or Catholicizing them with our Catholicism. And now all of that stuff that we set up since World War I, essentially, has fallen apart in 2014, and people aren't knocking on the doors and saying we need to do. No one's saying anything. So you better believe that somebody's doing something about it, and that is the bad guys. So they did everything wrong in 2014. Just stuff that they can do but shouldn't do. Right? Let's just start with video games. How much I harp on the Switch, but recently I found out that they released Donkey Kong Returns for the Wii with the motion control issue, and it was not backwards compatible with old controllers. So, it's like, why did they do that? Were they trying to suppress just one game? Because other games did the same thing, like that recent Half-Life game only came out for the VR system. So, when they do that kind of thing, it just raised the question, why would they do that? And it seems that the Switch basically was a switch, not just of the technology that they're using, but they're firing everyone and starting over. They're switching up the industry. They were switching up the nature of how video games would be made. It wasn't going to be those cool R&D Nintendo guys that gave us all of our favorite classics. It's not going to be like that anymore. It's just going to be a bunch of outsourcing. Nintendo was unable to make their major titles, right? They outsourced Zelda, and their last big Star Fox game, which came out for the Wii U, had motion controls like my generation was waiting for forever. Finally, these awesome motion controls. We can look at the cockpit and the gunner. But then they said with the Switch that they didn't want to port it, and didn't want to support it either, because they felt that it got too many bad reviews. Like, Nintendo has no idea what the reviews are. Back to Donkey Kong, Tropical Freeze got almost perfect 10, and so did Returns. So why would Nintendo not port Returns to the Wii U or the Switch? Why wouldn't they do that? They did Tropical Freeze to the Switch, right? It was a smaller game, and I was impressed, but they didn't make any more after that. They cut the franchise off 2014. They didn't make any more Donkey Kong Country games after that. And they went back to something else now, Mario vs. Donkey Kong. They're going in a different direction again, like they did with DK64. So the point is, and one more thing, they never released Returns for any other system ever again, except for the NVIDIA Shield, and only for the Chinese market. You cannot play Returns right now on a controller unless you live in China. So that kind of suppression of their most classical, hardworking R&D department employees that have been at Nintendo for our entire lives are treated like that? No, it has nothing to do with Nintendo. They got switched up, and so did Disney, right? And let's see what else. In Russia, they had to do, something to counter the influence that Russia was potentially going to have here soon. I mean, clearly that influence on me, right? I found Fomenko 5-6 years ago. I'm like, whoa, how the hell does nobody know this guy? Blah, blah, blah. As so many other researchers have done, banging our heads against the walls, that these guys never got any of the publicity or attention or even a tiniest bit of it that they deserve. So to keep up the charade and to make Russia phobia continue off, well into the future, into the 10 years that we just experienced, they basically did just the most backhanded thing. They said, hey, Russia, here's a peace deal called the Minsk Agreements. We're going to stop bombing your citizens now, I mean, citizens consider themselves yours, but we consider them Ukrainian. We're going to stop bombing them. That's the agreement. Then they don't do that, and then those people cry and cry to Russia, please protect us, we're dying here. Russia steps up its game after Trump is out of office. During the West steps up the game during the reset. We just had the reset, right? With the COVID and war happening all at the same time. And they really tried to push this proxy war into Russia in more of an ideological way. if we could ruin them ideologically, if we can convince everyone that Russia really was the bad guy, then it doesn't matter if we lose 500,000 Ukrainian soldiers for nothing in the battlefield. We will get another 500,000 from another country if we keep the propaganda campaign up. Right now, the French are upset because Macron suggested that the French soldiers might have to fight. So I'm not kidding. That was the plan. You can see the plan's kind of falling apart now, but that's not the point. The point is, in the last 10 years, all of us have felt the squeeze. And it's because, well, the banks did something bad, right? And the government did something bad with the interest rate, and they spent way too much money, and left us behind, and they inflated the market, which is something the government should never accidentally do, right? So that all the prices went up, a lot of people went homeless, and there's no resources for the homeless people. And then we got the immigration. And the immigration is somehow getting in line in front of the homeless people who have been born here. You know, it's weird, right? But as long as the plan keeps going on, then eventually the homeless people will all be routed off to FEMA camps, and the immigration people will basically take over demographically like they have in the past, and they will have the victory they want. All that's required is for them to win ideologically, to convince us that the immigration thing was, humane and the right thing to do, and America's too rich anyway and has all this space anyway, blah, 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 blah. Propaganda, right? It was so effective, all the rest of our lives have started falling apart in the last 10 years because they pressed all the buttons, hit all the stops, and all of us felt the squeeze. And those of us with, cushy lives, I'm sure knew some of us without. And for those that didn't get a chance, they just rotted. They had to go find it out for themselves that now it's going to be too difficult to live in the street. There's too many violent people, and it's way too expensive to just buy stuff. You're going to have to become entirely dependent on the nanny state and do what they say, or it includes vaccinations and whatnot. I mean, it was very grim. But the only reason that we're here talking about it, honestly, is because, like I said before, it's been countered. Because people were aware of the plan was out in front, and it was all about convincing us that it was the good plan, while convincing us that all of the things the enemies were saying were evil and we just should not listen to them. Like they're saying right now, Hamas has rejected the ceasefire. Like, come on. Like, that's just reject, accept, right? Now it's like a negotiation process. What were the terms that they did not like, and why are you saying it like that? And we don't get to hear that because they don't want us to hear that because they want to keep this campaign up. And they don't care how many Israeli soldiers die in it. They don't care how many kids die. The more the better to those people that wanted these wars to escalate into a place that we could no longer stop them from happening. World War 0, 1, 2, and it was supposed to be 3. Didn't happen. And for those people that are still alive, my prediction is all you gotta do is hang on for a few more years, because in the next 4 years, we're gonna see a colossal reset in the opposite direction, like a slingshot. And it just seems so improbable. But all it really takes is for that propaganda campaign to fail. If the other ones succeed, the ones that say, hey, no. People who are born in their locations first, nationalistic first, and we start from there. Let's make sure every country is taking care of their own people before any of us try to intervene ever again anywhere else in any kind of facade like the UN or NATO or whatever you want to call it. Just, it's over. That paradigm is over. And I'm hoping that it really does get better for us in the next 4 years, because I don't know how much some people will be able to last if it doesn't. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys. I really appreciate my followers. Thanks for all the comments and everything, and see you next time.